So how cynical is Moses going there again and again, saying, God, you told me to do this. You've called me to do this. Like, why isn't it working? Why is he still hardening his heart?
Oh, yeah. Like you say those words, I got goosebumps because it's just like that sense of calling that brought Moses again and again and again. Like, haven't you learned from the frogs already? Who likes frogs and fleas and boils, right?
This is Journey with Care, a podcast by CareImpact, where curious Canadians find inspiration to love others well through real-life stories and honest conversations. Hey, Wendi, welcome back.
Good to be back here.
We are in our second thoughts episode. That's a mouthful. We're reflecting on our conversation we had with Troy. What a great conversation. The episode was called From Meh to Meaningful, A Cynic's Guide to Compassion. What are your thoughts just coming off of that interview?
Well, I really loved talking with our friend Troy. We go back quite a few years, so it was just really neat to connect on this topic. And I have to admit, Johan, that it also challenged me. It gave me some framework. Even going to this last weekend, I just came back from Toronto from a lot of meetings and networking, and it sat with me throughout the weekend, taking to heart some of the challenges that came out of our conversation, saying, how do we respond to cynicism? And why am I feeling cynical? Can I go deeper than taking the cheap seats? And why do people respond cynically to maybe the grandiose God vision that CareImpact might be up to? And is it even possible? This quest we're on to see the whole church engaged in caring for their neighborhood.
Yeah, I thought it felt like it was a really important conversation for the church in general at this time. I was also like, it kept coming back to me over the weekend, and it forced me to think about the areas, where am I cynical? Where am I not curious? Where am I having presumptions about people and about good ideas? And I think I came to the conclusion that I got some cynicism in me.
Join the club, the Cynics Club. But we have to be gracious. Like if our listeners are thinking, well, maybe, yeah, what Troy said resonated with me too, or I'm facing that. I think we need to be gracious to ourselves and saying, what is that we talked about? It's a coping mechanism. It's maybe the cheap seats to how we deal with things, but it is a coping mechanism for probably some mistrust that has happened, that we have reason to kind of choose those upper deck seats. There's inner wounds that have not been dealt with, that if we I don't want to put my hand to the fire again. I already got burnt once. And so there's a cynicism that we're like, heck no, I'm not going near that again. And it's warranted. So I think there's grace for it. But Johan, where do you think we can pass through it? Because obviously we can't camp cynicism in everything in life, because it's really not going to be for the greater good. It's really, we talked about it, at the detriment of relationships and working through problems. Where do you see a way through that?
Well, first of all, I think you're right. I think behind every cynic and every cynicism, there is a hurt, right? Someone's been burned in one area or another. Otherwise, they have no reason to be cynical. And I really like how, like your question you posed, how do we get through that? Troy really brought this to the forefront, and it's the theme of our podcast. Let's get curious or stay curious. Those are kind of the things we've been saying over the last few seasons of the podcast. And I really think curiosity is the key to battling cynicism. Just inquiring, asking those questions about, why do you think this way? Why do you want to do this? What's going on behind the scenes? Like, that's going to battle that cynicism, because we're just making assumptions when we're cynical.
Yeah. Yeah. And rather than bypassing around it and just saying, okay, I'm just going to avoid those things. I liked what we had also talked about, just needing that deeper sense of why and leading to a higher sense of faith. I put it to practice this weekend when I hear church leaders talking. I'll just say it was a beautiful city leaders network. There was over 50 people there from 19 different cities. So city leaders that are working on church networks in their city. So very inspiring. But the cynic in me says, but church, wake up. We've been trying to work with you and you're still in your little church tents. And how do we land the plane? How do we really create impact? How do we really work with government? But what I felt challenged to is to sit at the table, not because I have higher power or greater insight, but God has empowered us with certain insights and connections and this calling to bring the church into community and for the community to really influence and inspire the church on what it means to be the church. Faith allowed me to genuinely sit there at the table and smile in the face of some of our greatest obstacles and say, but God, my faith isn't in convincing people around me. My faith is in, but God has called me. He's given me this invitation to sit in a room of people that are equally called by God. And we're all trying to just find our way through and be able to smile at that, because days before, just to put it in context, we can sing Kumbaya as churches and get really wound up and like, oh, great, look at this way that God has called the church. And that is true. But I also, days before, sat with cynics within government around my kitchen table that are reporting to the ministry in Ottawa on the plight of poverty. And the cynics around my table said, but Wendi, do you really think the church, there's hope for the church? Have you seen what has happened in history? Do you see how enclosed their minds are and how they're doing damage by not listening to the people? And so I'm sitting both sides of the table and saying, Kate, we need hope outside of this world. And that's what's anchoring me right now and rescuing from my own cynicism. And I'm working it out. I don't have it.
Yeah, and those questions that you mentioned, those are things that inner cynic speaks to us. Mm-hmm. And it really chokes out faith. Yeah. And I think that might be one of the reasons why the Bible says, take every thought captive, right? Like we want to take those questions, those thoughts, that inner cynicism, and take it captive and say, no, this is actually choking my faith. And you're talking about sitting around a table of leaders. That's one of my biggest personal wrestles. I'm just going to be vulnerable here for a second, but I feel like I've had a bad track record of church leaders in my life where there have been some falling out, sexual sin, and all these sorts of things. And it's like, I'm starting to be cynical of church leaders and church leadership. And ultimately, your trust is in Him. Our hope is in Him. And we don't want to put too much stock into our leaders. We want to put all our stock into the Word, into Jesus, into our faith. But you got to still trust people. You still got to have leaders in your life,
right?
We
do, but I think there too, we need to have a bit of grace and reality check there because it is nuanced. I think we want to say either we trust them or we don't. And I'm not going to trust an abuser. I'm sorry. It doesn't mean I can't forgive them, but I'm not going to trust somebody who has exploited my gifts and my talents in ministry and have used it for not in a glorifying way. I cannot trust them. And those things are true. And it doesn't mean that we just let's just put a Band-Aid on that and it's okay. Like the church is still the church. It's the God and spiritually bypass that. Those things are true. And it's also true what we're seeing on the other side, And so I feel like we have to be okay with the middle messy and be nuanced in it and yet find healing, yet find redemption, yet find freedom within the yes and kind of zone where I think we have reason to have filters. I go into churches with different filters on, not because I'm trying to be cynical and I don't love the church, but I can't unsee what I've seen. I can't unhear what I've heard. And I don't think God calls us to just put it on a shelf and just say, oh, it's not so bad. I think we need to have a spiritual discernment on honoring and drawing out what is good and nurturing those things and not diminishing or burying what is bad.
Yeah, so there's a wrestle there that I hear when you're saying that. So where do we go from here? Like we kind of mentioned how we can get through this, and that's through curiosity. But you're holding these two things in tension where you've seen the reality of what has happened, but you still want to have faith.
Well, if you think of it as a candy shop, or a store, I think the easiest grab would be for the eye-level shelf of cynicism of the sugar-coated candy and saying, oh, let's just grab this. This is going to be a filler. It's going to give us a sugar high. We're going to feel okay after this. Or the Sour Patch Kids or whatever that just gets that cynicism out of the way. And we just unfiltered, just blow people away and sort of cancel them or just spiritual bypass. It's not so bad. That would be the easiest grab on the shelf. But I think if we go lower and we dig deeper, I think what we really need is the nutrition of wisdom and discernment. And I think that's harder because we're going to have to prepare that. We're going to have to cook that. We're going to have to really be intentional about choosing what is good for us in those situations rather than the cheap filler. Cynicism is a cheap way out. It's a cowardly way out. And I'm speaking to myself in that. But where is the wisdom and discernment to say, okay, these things are not okay. I'm not okay with that. And I don't think God is okay with some of these things. But then what? Is there something, a mustard seed? Is there something even at a small level that is good, that we can honor and nurture? Where do we see God in the messy? Is God gone and out of this? Or is God seeking the righteousness of the people to draw out what is good and to speak out about injustice, take away what is bad, call out injustice, call out unrighteousness, but still with a heart that's after God, that is loving and kind?
And I think there's an opportunity for us to get vulnerable in some areas where you're not necessarily exposing yourself to hurt again. Let's say there's a new church initiative and there's that inner cynic in you that says, well, I've seen that happen. That's not going to work again. Maybe if you just give yourself to that thing, you're probably not going to get hurt in that situation, but you're going to give yourself an opportunity to learn from maybe past mistakes and past things that have happened, and maybe you'll find a way to grow. I think there's an opportunity for us to grow in going beyond being cynics and actually try doing some things without exposing ourselves to being burned and hurt all the time.
Yeah, and I
right?
think let's learn from our cynical and the wounds from our past and why we're cynical. Let that be our teacher. Let's not just shame ourselves for like, oh, I can't believe my heart is like so cynical about this. No, let's learn from our wounds. Let's learn from our mistrust. What is that teaching me? And now it would be stupid just to go into another situation and say, oh my goodness, I didn't know it'd burn me again. Well, you haven't learned. And so how can we learn from those things? And it's okay to have different filters. It's not a skepticism filter. Like if we aim high, it's like what questions would I ask differently so I don't get to the same end? What red flags was I too Pollyanna for that I was just hoping for the best and that I should be discerning further? Like we don't have to beat ourselves up for having been hurt in that way in the past, but how can we ask discerning questions and look for discerning things and be okay with not having perfect outcomes? Be okay to walk away when things just aren't ready. This is something that I'm currently working through. Not every church network, not every pastor and leader who loves Jesus is going to get what it is, the depth of what we're doing. They just don't. And it's not an English issue. It's not a marketing issue, although we're trying to get better at speaking in very accessible language. I can walk into a room and there will be some people that just get it. And I'm like, okay, we got to keep going deeper. And then there's others that we have these discussions and I realize we're just not going anywhere. And that's okay. It's not a judgment on them. It's just like, this isn't the right timing. And so my earlier self, my cynical self would have said, you guys just don't get it. Just like shake the dust on my feet. Like I that cynical side of me. But now I can just like, okay, this isn't my timing right now. I'm not going to put a lot of invested time and energy into that area because I've learned from that. I will be burnt from that. We will go under for people like that. But there is a way that we can flourish.
What comes to mind when you talk about that? I think about Moses trying to get his people released from Egypt, from slavery, and the multiple times that he goes to the Pharaoh and Pharaoh hardens his heart.
Yeah.
And yet he's taken a step in faith because he's being obedient to God. He's doing what God
So
told him, go to
good.
Pharaoh and do
Yeah.
this. And yet Pharaoh hardens his heart. So how cynical is Moses going there again and again, saying, God, you told me to do this. You've called me to do this. Like, why isn't it working? Why is he still hardening his heart? And there's still humans involved, right?
Oh, yeah. Like you say those words, I got goosebumps because it's just like that calling, that sense of calling that brought Moses again and again and again. Like, haven't you learned from the frogs already? Who likes frogs and fleas and boils, right? Like, my goodness, that would be an opportunity for cynicism. But that calling came from above his own willpower to like make change happen and be a justice driven, like, I'm going to like make a name for myself. There was a deeper calling that kept bringing him back to the table. And you know what? There's some truth in that. If our calling is greater than the circumstances around it will get us to do crazy things and keep coming back to the table. You've just challenged me. I need to keep going back to the pharaohs of our land. And not that everybody is like that, but it often, the pharaohs in my life are the pharaohs of indifference. This is the topic we're talking about. The people are like, meh, I love it, yes, but meh, can this really happen? But let's keep coming back.
And I think we can become cynical of the Lord, right? Like, it was the Lord that told him to do it. And it's like, really? You're telling me, like, it's failing. So what are those circumstances in our life where we feel called to do something so strongly? And it's like, okay, the Lord definitely has his hand in this. I'm going to go do it. And then we see it fail.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been in that situation many times and I feel like a failure. I'm like, God, I guess I didn't hear you correctly. But no, like Moses heard the Lord correctly. But again, like you said, that timing thing, it's that time. The Lord's going to do the right thing. He's going to soften that hardest heart. And sometimes it takes human effort. Sometimes it takes him calling us over and over again to keep going at it. Right?
And it's that obedience in responding to the call and doing it anyway, where we're not doing it for the outcome measurements or the KPIs or the success in numbers and the accolades of others. That's not necessarily a badge of honor for faithfulness. And sometimes or often that can distract us. And that's one of the plights of the church right now, where we have a marketing issue and the church is in decline. And so like we need to be based out of calling and obedience and grit to do it anyway and realize that the outcomes are co-created. The power comes from God, but he also needs us to be as obedient to actually show up and do the impossible. And Johan, you and I doing the roles where we're doing and a lot of things people might not realize that we show up for, it might not make sense to a lot of people, but we do it anyway. We get up and face our computer screens in our different homes because there's a sense of calling and we need to keep this to heart.
I think that's a good way to end this conversation. For listeners, like, I just want them to sit with that Moses story because it's going to sit with me now, I think, for a little bit. Going back and just being obedient to the voice of the Lord. And let's not be cynical of the Lord.
And we've got some maggots in our land in politics and all kinds of things. So that analogy could keep going. So pay attention to the plagues around you and still keep showing up.
All right. Now it's time for
Care Lingo.
All right. So this one I posted on the Care Impact podcast group on Facebook. So if you're not on there, you might want to join because you can make your voice heard. We had a few people chime in on what they think our term today, which is
wraparound services.
Wraparound services. All right. So we had Galena chime in and she thought wraparound services had to do with kind of wrapping your luggage at the airport, something like that.
Yeah. You know what? I thought of you, Galena. I took a picture of it in Toronto. I was stuck there. My flight got canceled and they had wraparound services just for you. They were wrapping luggage. I thought of you. And then there's Kathy who said, isn't that kind of a spa treatment, a chocolate wrap for me, she says. It was a fun play on words here.
Now, when I heard the term wraparound services for the first time, I didn't know what it meant. I don't remember what I thought it meant, but here's what I might think it meant if I was hearing it for the first time. So I actually have two definitions like I did last time. I'd like to do two. I don't know why.
Go for it.
You know, it's that extra employee at Subway specializing in those customers that ask for a wrap rather than a bun.
Ooh.
That would be a wraparound service.
Yeah.
I am the wraparound Subway
The
master.
wraparound
What do they call
artist.
it? Yeah, wraparound artist. That's it. Now, this is my favorite one. You know, when you have that worship leader that's a hip hop artist, he grabs that wireless microphone and starts bouncing around the congregation, getting everyone into it. He's rapping around. And it's a service. It's a church. This is called the wraparound service, where we're going to get our rapper worship leader getting this whole building jiving and bouncing.
Okay,
You know?
I saw that in the notes, Johan, and this is why I don't get it again, because I'm not a musician. I'm like, I hope he explains himself, but now I get it. So, yeah, kudos to you. That was...
Would you go to a wraparound service?
If it was Troy. Troy is a really good rapper. He really is. And I've had him do wraparound in, not just in the youth, but with seniors, and they were into it. So we did wraparound service according to your definition.
So Troy, if you're listening, come to Winnipeg and do a wraparound service, and we will show up. We will show up, and we will promote it on the podcast, saying this is CareImpact's first ever wraparound service with Troy Lydiot.
Shameless plug. Find Scribe. He goes by the name Scribe for his music on any music players.
Yes, I'll throw that in the show notes too. Yeah. So, Wendi, what is a wraparound service?
Well, wraparound service, I guess it's normal to me. I wouldn't have thought of all of these different definitions, but it simply means we're looking at the complexity of a situation and looking at it multifaceted. So finding a supportive village around a individual, a family, or a group of people that need wraparound support. So you can't just like give a Band-Aid and like if you just give them food at the food bank, it'll be fine. But food bank is at the table. We have family services, counseling supports, and churches. Oh my goodness, there's such a need. And this is what got me to quit my job to start this. There is such a place and a need for the church to wrap around families and individuals going through hardship, not in a fix-it way, but as part of the solution. And just being in community, that is a wraparound support and how we serve people in a comprehensive way in collaboration with the whole community.
There you have it. Wraparound services. Hey, if you got a term that you would like us to decode, jump in on the Care Impact podcast group on Facebook. In the show notes, the link, you'll find it there. Or head over to our website, careimpact.ca/podcast, and send us a message. You can do audio message, text message, all that stuff. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. Thank you for sharing the episodes. That's how we grow the podcast. That's the best way, is word of mouth. Keep sharing with friends and family, and let's get those conversations going at the table. And always remember to stay curious. Thank you for joining us on Journey with Care. To get more information on weekly episodes, upcoming opportunities, or to connect with our community, visit journeywithcare.ca or find Care Impact on Facebook and Instagram. Or just check the show notes for these links and all the links related to this episode. Share your thoughts, leave us a message, and be part of a network of individuals journeying in faith and purpose. Together, let's discover how we can make a meaningful impact.